Hey everybody, welcome to our session on paraphrasing well and avoiding plagiarism. Um, all of you guys have been in higher education before, so you've been through your fair share of plagiarism tutorials, I'm sure. So what I want to focus on with you here today for about 10 minutes or less is on what to look out for when writing academically in terms of avoiding plagiarism. And a big part of that has to do with paraphrasing in our own words what we read the other people write, and if we want to use their ideas, facts, information, whatever they provide. As writers, we have to do some work in rephrasing those into our own words. And that can get some writers into trouble sometimes, either because they don't feel they can say it better than the original author, which, as an old grad student of mine said, unless it's Shakespeare, there's always a better way to say it. Be that as it may, your job as academic writers really is to take other people's information, repackage it, so to speak, and present it as, in your own voice with the particular focus you have chosen. So having said all that, let's look at a couple of slides here. Just to give you a quick overview, I'm going to cover three major things with you. The first thing is two basic rules to avoid plagiarism when it comes to writing. The second one is to review the APA rule on when to quote and what that means in APA, and also some pitfalls to look out for. We're going to look at some examples. And the third thing is I just want to really emphasize and show you in some examples how plagiarism, in addition to it being an academic offense, actually is really bad in order to keep your reader's attention, because your reader will have trouble following your narrative if those are not your words, if you just patchwork it together from other places. So we're going to look at some examples for that. Alrighty, let's get started. So the basics of avoiding plagiarism in academic writing, there's really two major rules. Basic rule is writers have to document where the information presented in the paper is coming from. So this is a big order, right? You have to always show where does this particular fact come from. So if it's 10% of patients on dialysis, whatever, you have to show where does this number come from, because you didn't just wake up one day in the morning and say, oh, guess what, 10% of patients on dialysis and so on, right? You're getting that somewhere, so you have to document your ideas. I always say to writers, particularly in graduate school, when they're writing with research and they're producing, larger pieces of writing, larger assignments with lots of research, literature review, and so on. I always tell them that when it comes to writing with research, when you're summarizing other people's work to create a context for either, for the paper you're writing, or if you're doing your own research for the kind of study design that you've come up with, when you do that, you have to really show exactly where it's coming from, and you cannot leave anybody out. And so what I often see in some of the papers like that, I see paragraphs without any citation, and that makes me very nervous. Right? Especially, I remember this paragraph on a treatment plan. Was a nursing student, a treatment plan that was tested somewhere else, and it was no indication given of where it was coming from. And there were at least 2 or 3 sources that she had that probably needed to be in there, and she was able to put them in there because we were like, well, wait a minute, she needs some support here for these ideas and these facts that she's presenting. So as a rule of thumb, when you're writing with research and parts of a paper where you're reviewing research and summarizing it, if there's a paragraph without a citation, pause and see if you need to change that. So basic rule number 1, have to document where our ideas are coming from, right? That's actually a form of plagiarism as well. You might not even be misquoting or using somebody else's exact writing. If you don't cite where your ideas are coming from, you're making yourself vulnerable towards the accusation of plagiarism. Basic rule number 2, and that's all we have today, 2 rules. Sentences or part of sentences taken from the original text verbatim in the exact original phrasing must be documented as direct quotes. Just a quick reminder, in our paper for this course, we actually don't want you to use direct quotations. It's a shorter paper, and we really want you to practice writing in your own voice and getting that experience, which will be very valuable as you continue in your education here at UMB, in this master's program, as you continue to write more and more. So back, I forgot to mention the first example for basic rule number 1 on the top. You'll see an example of one sentence expressing some large ideas and then having just some citations, right? That sentence is written in the author's own words, not taken from somewhere else. The second example, you see there's some quotation marks in the sentence. That passage between the quotation marks is taken verbatim, the exact phrasing, the exact order, the exact words from the original text. And I know it comes from page 119, which make sure that you always include the page number when you're using a direct quote. That's a standard rule in APA. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with quotations. Try to integrate them into your sentence rather than citing a whole sentence without providing any introduction into it or any kind of context. And again, in this paper, in this class, no direct quotations anyways. So let's look at the second part of our session today, the APA rule on when you have to start quoting. So how many words can I actually take from somebody else? Is there a limit? Good, it's a valid question. In APA, the rule is that once you start taking 5 or more words that are the same in the original, the same sequence, you have to quote them, put quotation marks around them. And I want to caution you, though, to be probably even more vigilant around how you phrase your paraphrases of smaller passages in the text that you're using for your writing. So let me show you an example for that where it can get a little tricky. So the first box here, directly quoted passage, gives you the original from a text by Lester from a book called Writing Research Papers. If you want to take a pause right here, it's a good point to look at the directly quoted passage and the paraphrase passage on the bottom. And so take a moment to read those. Okay, you come back from your pause. You've read both of these passages. And if you have the feeling that the paraphrase passage sticks really closely to the original, you are correct. I've juxtaposed them here in a different way. I've put the first box contains the original passage, and the bottom part again is the paraphrase, the attempted paraphrase. And if you notice, everything highlighted in yellow is the exact same phrase or combination of phrases of words from the original passage. So technically there are some sentences in the paraphrase here that are not plagiarized because they don't quote, they don't use 5 or more words necessarily all the time in the same order. However, if you look at the structure of the original passage and the structure of this passage, they're almost identical. Let's look at the first sentence. The first sentence in the original says, students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes. The paraphrase says, students often use too many direct quotations when they take notes. So there's some things that have been replaced to make it look like it's a different sentence, but in essence it's the same sentence. So watch out for that. This is sometimes it happens when you're very close to the text and you're looking at the text and trying to figure out how to paraphrase it. Put it aside and then actually do a paraphrase. So last thing I want to emphasize to you again is when you're plagiarizing and you're copying, in a sense, copying verbatim passages from other people's text, it becomes very incomprehensible. Take a moment here and read this, pause here and read this paragraph. Okay, you're back from your pause. So you've read the paragraph and you probably had a reaction like, huh? What? What's going on here? If you had that, good for you. That certainly would have been my reaction reading this passage for the first time. And the reason for that is that almost everything in this paragraph has been taken verbatim from the 2 different sources, which are cited in here. So that's good. That's a first step. The citation is done correctly, but it's still plagiarism because nothing has changed. Everything in green comes from the US news source. Everything in blue comes from Wikipedia. So there was not a lot of attempt here to make it the writer's own voice. I see this a lot when people work close to the deadline, right? You're kind of rushing and these things can happen sometimes not intentionally, but this is a sort of textbook example of plagiarism that you would get in severe trouble for. And just as a reminder, right, you might remember this from your undergraduate careers or previous college careers, graduate or undergraduate, that Academic dishonesty and plagiarism in particular can cause you to either fail the assignment or fail the whole course, and in some severe cases can cause to academic dismissal as well. So don't get into that rigmarole of plagiarism and academic dishonesty. Get started early and make sure you cite properly and you paraphrase in your own words as much as possible. I included a version here that I paraphrased more carefully with some smaller direct quotes to give you an idea of what a revision of this paragraph could look like. So if you wanted to pause here, you can, or you can come back to it. I just want to wrap it up quickly with you guys. So we reviewed the 2 basic rules to avoid plagiarism. Number 1, make sure you cite all of the ideas, facts, information you're using for your paper. Number 2 is make sure you clearly mark direct quotations when you're taking verbatim passages from original texts. Second piece we focused on the IPA guideline, 5 consecutive or more words of a passage need to be quoted. It's taken with a grain of salt. Again, make sure to always paraphrase as in your own words as much as possible, moving away from the structure of the original text. And then lastly, again, we've seen some examples how plagiarism can really ruin the reader's experience, right? And that's not a good thing. We definitely don't ever want to ruin our reader's experience. We want to make it as easy and as comfortable as possible for our reader to get through our work and to absorb the information we're presenting. Shoot me an email if you have any questions about this, imay@umaryland.edu, or leave a comment on the discussion board. Look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions. Bye.